Hello and welcome to IABSE in Conversation, where I, David Knight, talk to eminent and interesting designers and structural engineers about what inspires them and their life and career. To kick off our first series, I'm delighted to welcome John Roberts as my guest. John is a structural engineer, designer, and early adopter of technology with a career that's extended from London to Los Angeles to India and Hong Kong. He has worked at Arup, Atkins, Laing O'Rourke, and is now an independent consultant. So, John, where did this all start? Was there a particular experience in your childhood that pushed you into a career as an engineer?
It was interesting when I was joining Laing O'Rourke, as you do for senior positions. Sometime you end up doing psychometrics, and quite an interesting interview. And when I met the guy who did it afterwards, I kind of my summary was, I'm living the frustrated engineering dreams of my father, who was in the RAF and on ground crew, and I grew up surrounded by all these drawings, and he liked taking apart things, but he'd ended up in food management, and so I think I probably as simple as I always got praised for playing with Lego and things like that. So just for a long time, and I think because I had brother-in-laws who were physicists, I was very interested in doing that. But there was a point in my life, two events. One of which was going around Southampton University whilst I was in sixth form, and being fascinated by it. I still read New Scientist for light relief, but thinking, when somebody was talking about which way neutrinos span, thinking, ultimately I don't care that much. And then a couple of weeks later, we got taken around Portsmouth, what's called Portsmouth Polytechnic back in those days. And you walk in there, and because it's heavy, all the stuff with water is off to the right. I can remember walking through the door, walking in, and they had flumes which are squirting water around, and they had a bit of the Thames barrier, and it was noisy, and there was huge amounts of water, and they were talking about how to manage the world's water resources and all that kind of stuff. And I can remember just thinking, I'd really like to do this. It was almost as simple and visceral as that. And I haven't really done that much water since, but it was the thing that kind of opened up the door, that all that physics stuff that I liked has an application, and really that was the kind of those two visits at school just flipped me over from physics into engineering.
And that's quite interesting. And was you talked there about your father being in the RAF? Was there a lot of making and bits of machinery around the house? Was it that kind of environment that I imagine in most engineering households you have something of that?
There was it wasn't out and out engineering, but he ran a driving school. We had minis littering the garden, so there was always, like, my first car was a mini, because why wouldn't it be? And one of the big things, you can repair those yourself, so that was good. Almost, actually, when he died, most thing I became most emotional about was his shed, because in some ways that was that for me kind of embodied all the woodwork. I can remember standing there as a child and things being made, and it actually goes back beyond that in generations before. A lot of the furniture kicking around the family has been made by people in the family. So whilst I don't think I'm very hands-on, but I think that the fact that actually you can make things was built into me right from an early age.
It's an interesting parallel, isn't it, that between making and engineering? And it's engineering is often an academic version of making, and we build on that history from people we knew or people we've come across who are hands-on makers, and we try and abstract that into the engineering that we do.
And as you say, you go into the academic bit. I've enjoyed then, after being a designer for most of my career, moving into a contractor most recently for the last 6 years, and actually then being part of, being supportive of the people actually holding the spanner, pouring the concrete, doing the making. And actually that journey now, from having come up with concept designs and not being all the way through to the actual manufacture of it, is very satisfying when you see that from end to end. That's kind of that's a big buzz.
That's fascinating. And you went to university in the early 80s.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned Southampton, was it, that
Yes.
you went to? What was technology like at that stage? Had it started to have an impact on the teaching at university, or was it still a very new field?
The technology and the thinking about wider coordination, I think, was just about sneaking in. It was quite traditional in a way, but Southampton was it was a 3-year degree, because everybody was doing bachelor degrees at that stage, and they were the first people. Well, they were amongst, I think, 3 universities trialing this idea of the 4th year that provided you with a bit more breadth. And so I did that course, and so I ended up with a diploma. The following year it would have been called a master's, but I'm got two qualifications. And technology was just about starting to sneak in. We were still being taught quite old-fashioned structures and equations. I could go on a lot about the idea about qualitative design. There was a good course there which was about understanding the feel of how forces go through, which is one of my big things. And if I was going to pick one course that's affected my life there, that's the one about the qualitative design of structures. But thinking about technology, and this has really put down a whole load of routes later on. Two courses, my 2 projects there, or 2 of my 3 projects. One of which was I did a programming of a piece of software to search for slip circles and factors of safety in slopes. Which, if you look back at it, it's interesting. I read a history of geotechnics, and it mentions that a lot of universities were developing this then. I was Southampton's version of that, and so that was one part of it. And then the following year, I did a group project which was working with local shipbuilders, which was actually, and this is now 1985, was looking at 3D modelling of portions of ships and planning. It was wireframe, very chunky graphics, but way ahead of what was happening in civil engineering. But looking at how they were using that to plan the coordination of these pieces of ships coming together and the cutting of plates and modern methods of construction, 1985. And it just happened to hit a sweet spot with those 2 projects, because strangely enough, one of my summer jobs in London, I ended up writing software over a summer and automating a task I'd been given, which then became the early version of Arup's Compos program for composite beam design. And then also I came straight out and happened to land in the first team in the UK doing CAD, and that was for the Broadgate development. And so within a week, this is 1986 now, I was out on a 2-week CAD course in Woking, learning how to draw on a screen. So I'm absolutely at that cusp where I didn't draw on a drawing board. I went straight onto screen.
And reading about your career, it's a real golden thread that comes through is that impact of technology on everything you've done. I'm going to come on to it a bit later on, but it is fascinating to see how your career and technology have developed in parallel.
It is, and it's interesting that there's 2 ways you find a lot of people get very into the technology. I've always been interested in what we can do with the technology, and that's still a lot of the things I'm talking about now. I've started working with some companies who are helping construction technology companies in startups, and a lot of discussion about modern methods of construction. And so there's a lot of really, really exciting stuff happening in the industry, and a bit of me. I use the word digital transformation quite a lot. Actually, the whole of my life's been digitally transforming. And it goes back further than that. People have been writing software. Just the pace of it's picked up, and there's also now this possibility that all linking up. But for me, again, I find myself, if I go to a review, the questions I ask are becoming simpler. It's like, what are we doing? Because quite often you put 10 people in a room and everybody will start talking about exciting stuff, and it's very easy to forget what we're trying to do. And what the aim is, and what's the outcome, and what does good look like. And in some ways, my reviews are becoming simpler and simpler. I'm just trying to pull people back, and it's like, okay, do we know what we're doing? Right, let's go and find some technology that helps us. So I always start from the thing we're doing, and then go and find the technology, as opposed to this is a cool bit of technology. What can we do with it?
Yeah, it's back to your qualitative analysis course again at university, isn't it? That idea that there is something in the core of the engineering that is facilitated by technology, but not necessarily governed by it.
It's going to be interesting with artificial intelligence. That's the first time I can see it coming over the hill, that suddenly answers will pop out we're not expecting. I always believe that, you know, with analysis, have I got a back of the envelope that I can work out what I think the force is going to be? Because, you know, quite often you see people accepting answers that are a factor of 10 out, and you want to be within 20%. You know, and you don't want any surprises. You want the computer to verify what you're doing, and that's true of many things. I think artificial intelligence is going to be interesting because it's going to start understanding wider things than we can know and going, oh, isn't it a good idea if you did this? And there's already examples in other industries coming out, and that's going to be fascinating.
So you joined Arup Associates straight out of university.
Yeah.
Arup Associates obviously is slightly different to Arup proper. Can you explain what the difference is?
It's become slightly dissolved now, which is unfortunate. But it was really, well, it goes right. The history of Arup Associates goes right back to the beginning of multidisciplinary work. Before, there was a stage when structural engineers were structural engineers and architects were architects, and they posted each other drawings. And Ove Arup, who I was fortunate enough to meet, just you know, he was still alive when I joined the company. He many years ago had this idea of it being more integrated and working in a more multidisciplinary way. And the first person, interestingly, to join Arup, who wasn't a structural engineer, was an architect, and they started working on simple industrial projects and various other, and building up towards laboratories and things like that. There was an interesting point where then the architects they worked with went, hang on a second, you're turning into a firm of architects, you're competing with us. And there's a letter that Ove wrote, which basically says, look, okay, what I'm doing is I'm kicking them out, I'm calling them Arup Associates, they're in a separate building. We can still work with you. And Arup Associates was always conceived as architects, engineers, and quantity surveyors at the beginning. And it was the idea that architecture, the engineering behind it, of all disciplines, and the cost and the planning of the procurement should all be one. And for me, arriving as a graduate, I sat down on day one, and I wasn't sitting next to an engineer. I was sitting next to a mechanical engineer on one side, an architect on the other side, and there was a quantity surveyor behind me. And every conversation I heard, and I always believe that proximity, this is going to be interesting if we all work from home in future, proximity to those ideas and being able to overhear other people's conversations is an important method for learning, and it's an important method for coordinating projects.
I'm intrigued by that because it's very different to many people's experience of their first job, their first seat at a desk. Did it force an identity, a very delineated identity almost as a structural engineer in that team, yet obviously acknowledging everyone else? Did you feel like the structural engineer, or was it an opportunity to broaden your knowledge into everybody else's fields?
It was very, very much the broadening. About to say, you used the word delineating, and I'm thinking, no, that's wrong. Yes, that was the bit I was doing, but every conversation would have another discipline in on it, and there was a lot of overlap. You know, for instance, one of the things I learned quite early on was how to set out a staircase handrail, which is which an architect, you know, normally an architect would do, but we needed those because we were building steel frames. We needed the stairs really, really early. And the architect was doing other stuff to do with planning permissions, and so we wanted to get the steel package out, so somebody had to do it. So I went over to an architect and learned how to make sure you ended up with a nice handrail around and set out the staircase accordingly. And there was a lot of examples of that where the architects there were really good at structural grids, you know, and we were all kind of invading each other's space. And I've always enjoyed that blurring, and that. When I moved out of that team 5 years later and started working with Fosters and Partners, I think that was one of the reasons why I very quickly just became absorbed into working with that team, because I'm not really interested in boundaries. Again, it goes back, what are we doing? How do we get there?
And that leads me very nicely on to the canopies at Canary Wharf Tube Station. and which I think you said you checked on a spreadsheet, which I wouldn't be surprised if some people are still doing today. But they still look extremely modern, and it's obviously something you're very proud of. It's on your website on Masthead.
Interestingly, after I left Dirac Associates, and I did rather strangely, I was sharing a phone with Chris Wise, who's gone off to form expedition in the days when phones were tied to the table, and I can remember Chris pushing. This was a 5-week bit of work. Well, 6 years later, I handed the project on to somebody else when I went off to America. But yeah, we were doing this work on Canary Wharf, which for me was fascinating. It started with just sort of simple structural analysis. Then because there wasn't really a way, as I received it, there wasn't a way to make the curving arching pieces. The basic ellipse geometry was set, but was quite complicated. And then it's a swept ellipse. But then you get to the stage where that's the top surface and the bottom surface, but how do you set the glass out of it? Because that's not an ellipse anymore, because that's now a distance from an ellipse. And the drawing technology people were finding was not up to that accuracy. So actually building the whole thing as a spreadsheet was the way to do it. And so we built all the geometry in the spreadsheet and then brought that back into the analysis models. And then later on, there were some imposed movements when we were told that there was a load case that hadn't been allowed for, which caused a shear. And we were able to then take that model and develop it even further and track the corner of every single piece of glass against the other one to work out if the mastic was still going to be okay. And we managed to prove all that. So So I got very, very into big data handling at that point, and the link between analysis, geometry, Excel, and this was all about 1992.
And after that, you've already mentioned you moved to America, moved to Los Angeles in '97, I think.
Yeah.
It was the country probably an extremely different technological place at that stage. Was it an extreme culture shock to suddenly be in Los Angeles and at that stage?
Oh, there's lots of things just on a personal level. Yes, there was, and it's interesting because I've been abroad since. In some ways, you think America, that's easy. They're going to speak English, and I've seen it lots in the movies. It's going to be easy, and then the only thing is, then you get lulled, and you then run into all sorts of misunderstandings. And I remember doing a presentation describing a roof as well, A and B are okay, but C's a little dodgy. And about 4 weeks later, the client went, "So when you said it was a little dodgy, that wasn't good, was it?" And so bit of a misunderstanding there. And yeah, but it was a very multicultural office, which was great. Lots of people from all over the world there, because Los Angeles is a big melting pot. So that was fun. The weather was great, but also in terms of technology, it was a very interesting time to go, because everybody in the UK had been talking about getting one PC per desk. And I arrived in LA, and that move had happened. So straight away, it's first time I'm looking at one of these with 1997, and a lot of other stuff. I did a blog about technology through my life, and 1997, first email, first computer at home, first one per desk at work, and got into some really, really big analysis, and probably the most complicated analysis I've ever been involved in at that point. So that was kind of a key year for me, where suddenly the whole digital game just went right up.
And more sort of more intrinsically cultural. Obviously, there's a digital change, but was the practice very different in Los Angeles? The feel of the office, the relationships between the variety of people on the teams. How was that different?
I think in its heart, there was at its heart, the office was very similar. The Arab culture was quite strong. What was different was I think the pressures from outside. It was quite interesting there. I think in UK practice, an architect would like to see themselves as holding onto a building from beginning to end. The people we were working with were much more kind of, you had design architects and executive architects, and so there was a splitting of the process that we tended to be spanning. You also had, I think, much smaller fees and much more time pressure and much greater emphasis around standardization, which a bit of me wanted to rebel against, but actually there's quite a number of things. For instance, they're very crisp drawing standards, which just kind of meant production of drawings was very, very fast and very, very standardized. But you didn't waste time thinking about stuff you didn't need to think about. It tended to focus effort. So whilst sometimes the thinking time wasn't there, at the same time, actually, when you had thinking time, it was more focused. So there were quite a lot of interesting, so it was recognizable, but then morphed into different directions.
Mm. It's interesting. I've worked abroad as well, and the culture shock in a variety of ways, obviously in location, but also in practice, is something that I think actually for me is quite formative, and it's interesting to hear the same from you, and it jolts your thinking perhaps about how you work at a key stage in your career.
The other thing that I did I was very aware of for the first time when I did it in the States, and I've done it several times since, and it almost becomes a little bit addictive, is that thing of you by the time I'd been in the UK for, when did I go, 7. So basically 11 years working in the UK London office, Dirac Associates and Arup, and moving across, and I knew, you knew all the R&D people, and you knew how to get stuff done, and you had your network. And what it is like taking the whole of your life and just kind of screwing it up, and chucking it over your shoulder and going, right, start again. And it takes you right back to basics. You just go, right, what am I good at? What can I do? What's my reputation? Let's reinvent myself. How do I and actually that's quite good. The danger is I seem to have got to the stage later in my life when I'm just doing that every 3 years, but that, which is fine.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I noticed that you were in Hong Kong probably almost exactly the same time as I was in 2009 to 2011. I was on the West Kowloon station roof then.
Okay.
But it was
I went to presentations.
It was very formative for me. It was a slightly shocking time as an engineer to come out of a safe, comfortable environment in the UK to this world that I didn't understand and didn't know. And at that stage for me, I was relatively young, and the personal side of that was relatively simple. But you have kept moving around the world. It must have put a lot of pressure on family and personal life, as well as lots of exciting experiences.
It is something you've got to think about, and it's interesting. I ended up in Los Angeles by accident. I was supposed to be in Hong Kong, and as you see, I missed by quite a long way because I was trekking out, and we had a project that I was spending 1 week a month out for about 8 months, which was going to be over the ferry piers in the middle of central in Hong Kong, and then various technical issues happened with the foundations that were being supplied by others. And we did a lot of reports on how to solve that, but then reunification was happening, and the whole thing sort of ground down to a halt and petered out. And Anne and I had gone through that whole thing of because Dan was working, we didn't have kids at that stage, and we had that whole conversation about, do you want to give up your job and come with me, or and she decided yes. And in some ways, we wrapped our head around it, and then it didn't happen. At which point I went in and said, well, any other options? And my boss, Tony Fitzpatrick, was like, well, America. Could America go to America? San Francisco's not busy. New York, Los Angeles. And I went back to Anne, and famously she said, snow's in New York. And that was the basis of the decision of ending up in LA.
It's fascinating to hear the sort of small things that make your life turn. Was there a grand plan at any point? Did you say, well, I kind of want to work in all these places, and maybe this is the way to attach it, or is it just opportunity following?
The other thing that I say to a few people is that there are two definitions of the word career. One of which is a regular progression of life and professional development, and the other one is to charge madly about and crash through hedges. And there's a big element of the second.
Well, you had about 20 years at Arup, and then you shifted across to Atkins, back to the UK, and then heading out to India. What sort of drove the change really at that point? It's a big change of company and a big change of focus almost.
Well, probably a bit of psychology in a way. When I came back from the States, one of the reasons we decided to come back was realizing that I was finishing the big baseball stadium that I was working on, which had provided, it was a big project, but it had, yeah, to a certain extent, it had a regular rhythm. Our daughter was 6 months old, born over in LA, and it was a question of yeah, I would probably be touring the Midwest chasing work. And one of the people in the office had not come home for about 16 days because they'd just been bouncing from meeting to meeting in the winter. It's like, you can't really imagine it in the UK. You don't leave the country, but you don't get home for 16 days. I didn't really, and we kind of looked at each other and went, and all the things we liked doing, which was we used to do a lot of backcountry hiking and because fantastic stuff in the Mojave Desert and stuff we used to do. Now we had a 6-month-old, and it's like, we're not going to be doing that anymore. So I decided to come home. Felt a long way from family, actually. We were there on our own, and now with daughter Bethan. So we came back, and then for about 4 years, I went back to Dirac Associates, which was great and did some good stuff. But actually, if I look at it, it was a bit of a lull point in my career. Again, it was kind of living a regular life, fitted in with life to a great extent. It was good. I tended to turn up at home, which is important when you've got small ones. And then I'd ended up in Arup through a back door, really. I hadn't had an interview, and Anne was interviewing to go back to work, and Atkins came asking. And I was like, nah, I don't really want to. And Anne nudged me a number of times in my life and was like, well, you've never had a job interview. Why don't you go for one? You're 40 years old, go for a job interview. So I did. And me being me, I kind of got engaged in the process. And so initially went in with a very simple mission, which was to go and help. They had a structural team which had become increasingly sort of specialised and doing some really good stuff, but weren't working with the architects who were sitting down the floor plate from them. And there was a lot of people there who worked on the Burj Al Arab and other projects, and so there was some exciting stuff going on. And really, it was just the question of taking that group of people, then layering and a few other skills as well, and suddenly you just morphed the whole thing, and it became more integrated. And I thought I'd be doing that for a number of years, but then a conversation started which I got more and more engaged in, which was about setting up an outsourcing team in India. And there's a big thing there about company cultures. That Arup always kind of leads with, we do really good design. Everybody's a blur of things. Atkins would, back then especially, was we have really, really good processing, which is why they were kind of like more big infrastructure where Arup was playing with the architects. I got pulled over in some ways to try and give them a little bit of that sort of designy stuff. So I was there to mix it up a bit. But I was surrounded by excellent managers, much better managers than I'd ever been with before. And I can remember sitting in a load of meetings and thinking, these people sound very convincing about this India thing. They know what they're doing. I'm sitting here completely quiet, and they're saying, "Oh, we could do this. We could plan this." And it was still at the pre-planning stage. They hadn't really. I think it was 10 people recruited at that stage. But I can remember just thinking, why is it going to work? Why are people going to send work to this team? There's nobody there they know. Nobody knows what the skills are. Nobody knows how it works. And somehow it came up. Designer needs to go there. And somebody actually said, why not you? I phoned up Anne. She had a defensive stand because she was in Primark in Peckham. And again, I phoned up and went, if I nudge a conversation in a certain direction, we'll be in Bangalore in 2 months' time. And she went, okay. I then came back to somebody, had an argument for an hour about we couldn't make a life decision that quickly. 2 weeks later, we were picking schools in Bangalore, and then we were there. And the whole of the business, it was quite all these really, really convincing looking managers went, thank God somebody's going to go and solve them. Because like none of them, they were all looking like they had a grip on it, but they didn't. And it was just like, well, if you've got it, and I've very much learned that if you're going to if something needs sorting out, just climb in and sort it out, you know. And it was, for me, it's been one of the biggest things in my life. I've made more friends out of that process, and learned more during the next 2.5 years than I probably have in any period in my life.
And the experience in India must have been extraordinary, you know, from a career so far in English-speaking countries to a country where English was spoken but maybe not by everybody, to a world that was completely different, perhaps. Or was it an easier transition than you expected?
Well, yes and no. I'll tell you what the problems were in a second. Like, everybody's like, oh yeah, the language, whatever. Well, I dealt with language in Los Angeles. You know, there were problems. You get the hang of, every country has its own version of English. American English is one thing. Indian English is another one. My favourite phrase ever was the use of the word backside to mean something behind, which I just found funny all the time. My backside is full of paddy fields was the best thing that anybody ever said to me. You have to work out if you're going to cut that bit out. But as part, so that wasn't the problem. So the things, you know, naturally, it's a very fast-growing country. The demographic means you end up with a very young team. You end up with a very enthusiastic, hard-working team who are desperate to learn, and that was a fantastic buzz from my point of view. That the energy was great, and very savvy with technology. You talk about English, very good English skills out there. Also, interestingly, in the south of India, which is where most of the people came from as well, everybody, what you don't realise when everybody thinks there's a language called Indian, which of course there isn't. There is Hindi's quite strong in the north. Come down to the south, there's a lot of the states are drawn along vaguely language barriers, and Bangalore's right in the corner, so everybody's speaking different languages, and everybody's got about 4 languages. But normally we found if you put 5 people together in the office, they said they couldn't find one common language, so they revert to English. I never had any problems with that phase, and actually nearly all the problems we had was, I'm launching into a new subject here.
Well, I'd go for it.
Working back with the UK, this is where I started getting passionate about design processes.
Well, go on. What were the issues?
It's funny. All the video conferences I've been doing this morning, talking about design process, talking about standardization. Everybody said they were working to the same standard, but what you'd find was that people mean different things with different words. So REBA stage 3, REBA stage 4, and it'd be said as though that actually meant this is the set of things you do. And actually you discover that when you gave somebody the deliverables, they were happy, and somebody else in a different office wouldn't be. Similarly with drawings, we're working to Atkins standard, and then you use exactly that same template and give it to somebody else, and they're not happy with it. And all the time you'd find that everybody wanted different levels of work, different levels of verification, and it was really disruptive. And actually from the Atkins point of view, that was the odd thing, because it actually had introduced a change program across the company, much for the better, I think, that suddenly to have a proper view of what was going on in the UK and the Middle East, you needed to go over and sit in India and stare back at it. Because everybody, if you talk to them, said, we're doing the same thing. And it goes back to the fact they're trying to, when people sit in meetings, they all go, oh yeah, we're all doing REBA stage 3. And they all look knowledgeably and go, oh yeah, we all know what that is. And they've all got different things in their heads. This is where my obsession with, let's write, what are you going to do in REBA stage 3?
Yes.
So that for me was the big learning, because nearly all the time when people were starting to get frustrated with our office, it was the fact that, well, we've done that for somebody else and they're perfectly happy, so it's you. And this preferential engineering, wasted effort. People talk about a skills shortage, and we are throwing people as resource away by doing things badly. So whilst at Arup, especially Arup Associates, I would have laughed at process and the idea and do everything from first principles. Here I was 25 years later getting passionate about, let's do it the same.
Yeah.
So
were you able to, you talked about a change process for the whole company, were you able to influence back in that stage, or were you very much someone who had to take what you were given and return it?
it started a process that changed things within about 5 years. To a great extent, we would, the mission was to try and get that office up and off the ground. And the team I had went from, when I arrived there, it was 10 people. When I left there, it was 170 in my team. The office had gone to 400, and I believe it's now like 1,600 or something like that. So that was a success to a certain extent, just in terms of business as a startup, because it was an experience of a startup in a way. You had to kind of please the customer. So there were times you had to kind of take things, even though and I have to say the guys there and the guys and the girls. I say to the guys and the girls because it actually very, very interestingly, we didn't have any pro-women policy in place over there, but without trying, we ended up with 40% of the technical staff being women, which again shocked a lot of people when they came to visit the office. The fact that because a lot of women were going off and doing technical degrees and coming out, and it was like again, it's another thing of people when they came over to India didn't expect to see a better male-female ratio than the UK. So I always liked that. But the processes started, and actually I became later getting involved in, we did some of the early trials for BIM, and I was involved in the launch of BIM Level 2. There was a thing called the design principles that we were involved in writing, which again was trying to standardize what the processes are. Later on, when I was back in the UK, coming directly out of that, new drawing standards, new CAD standards, new BIM standards. And so there was and also we started it whilst we were in India, and it worked its way through the fact that the business management system became constant across the company. And so it became something owned by a lot of people across the company, but it was nice to see it, all the lessons that caused that, I think were learned by that experience from the company's point of view. It's always interesting to find a mirror, and the mirror happened to be in Bangalore.
And from then, we've talked a bit about your time in Hong Kong already, but you seem to move then into sort of rail projects, and maybe you've been working on rail projects before, and you in that period of your career where you were a designer very much from Dirac Associates through to the work in Hong Kong, you transitioned in type and form dramatically. Did you have a sort of favourite, something that really stands out as the key project in that period as a designer?
As a designer? I'll come back to the transition bit actually, which is quite important.
Okay.
Of all the projects that I'll pick that I ever worked on, I'll get the picture.
For those listening on the podcast, I'm now being shown a picture of Miller Park.
Miller Park Stadium. That's a retractable roof.
Fantastic.
Of the Baseball Stadium with 13,000 tons of steel on wheels. With some very, very complicated buckling theory, and many late nights and linked spreadsheets and analysis. And amazingly, we actually did the main analysis with 3 of us. The detail took an awful lot more. And this is 1997 and 1998, and drawings, analysis going off to spreadsheets, member size happening, optimization loops happening, and at the end, the drawings being written automatically. So we were ahead of the time.
Yes, definitely. Still people trying to get that still.
If I'm going to pick the one which was, and I joined the team at the end of concept, but at the beginning of scheme design, and then John Hewitt, who'd taken it through there, he went off to Australia. And so I held that through the end of scheme design in detail, and then followed it out on the site. So that was the and John was in Australia. Surinder Mann was the guy who actually went from the design team, actually became the site representative. And for me, that was a very tight team doing ridiculous things that had previously not been done. So that's why it's on the wall.
And you said you wanted to talk about the transition then between the types of projects you did.
In terms of career, like I'd come out of Arup as a designer. They'd pulled me into Atkins to influence design direction in the Epsom team, and I'd kind of gone to be a technical leader in India, but over 2 years, growing a team from 10 to 170, and they're quite, you get quite a lot, you're hiring, what was it, 100, can't do the sums anymore, 160 people who are quite young, and they're all quite enthusiastic, and it's a very competitive market out there. Not surprisingly, there was an awful lot of pastoral care, and there was a lot of politics back with the UK of chasing work, and a lot of business, local business versus this new startup offshoring business. And that just, for me, I was still always trying to be a designer and work on the projects, but at the same time, my day was just being packed with all this other stuff, which some people, if their career morphs, there's a very good idea around the way careers develop, which Phil Davis at Atkins developed this, and he's never drawn it, so I'll explain it. We all start off in technical corner. And some people stay there and get a deep knowledge of, they become the geotechnical expert or the materials expert, or the person who just works on the technical aspects of bridges or whatever. They stay in that corner. Some people start moving towards the projects corner and start becoming at the extreme, you can become the project manager, in which case you can almost have moved completely away from the technical. But a lot of people then end up somewhere along that spectrum. There's then another pull which pulls you sideways, which is business, which is now more strategic relationships and where the next work is coming from and where the industry's going and do we have enough bank loan and all that kind of stuff. Now, to a great extent, I'd naturally started off down the project route, but then I got more and more involved in I'd always been involved a bit in business development and chasing work. But then the work in Bangalore, running that office, really, I just couldn't keep my feet in the technical corner, which I wanted to be. So I found myself doing more and more kind of business stuff. And actually, I had a really honest conversation with the guy who was my boss there. He was like, why don't you just give up on the technical stuff? You can do that. You can go that way. And I've always likened it to the devil taking Jesus up to the top of the mountain and he showed me all the land lying around. Look, you can have all this. And I just had to come back and go, no, I'm not. I want to be the one holding the pen. I want to be doing the drawing. I want to be sitting there helping people with calculations. And so we brought people in now then to replace me at that management function. I backed myself out of the business in terms of the business bit of it, and then went off to Hong Kong to work technically on railway. And which was like therapy. So I learned lots, but I just ended up in a place not doing the technical stuff that I love, because I still get really, really excited by the technical thing. And the Phil Davis diagram that we did it with a group. I was network chair for structures at Atkins, which meant globally trying to coordinate some of the ideas. And there was about 10 of us on different themes, bridges and systems engineering, just trying to hold together people in disparate places technically. And when we all sat together and we all played this game, we all found that actually all of us had started off in technical, moved towards projects, being dragged sideways by business, and then all of us made the positive decision to loop ourselves backwards towards technical. And I found that and it was interesting. We all had this kind of, all done slightly different routes, but we all had this journey where we touched on the other directions and then come back as technical leaders.
It's fascinating actually. And I'm digressing slightly here, but we did a piece of work with a group called Built Environment a few years ago about career paths in engineering and particularly in the built environment construction. And one of the odd things about that was that very few people in construction have intended to be in construction apart from structural engineers and architects. And in general, people come in from funny places, start in one place, go transfer diagonally from place to place until they find something that grabs them, and maybe that's in a business sense or in a technical sense. But construction is full of people who have wide paths into what they do now.
Well, it's interesting. We're just arranging some meetings with Network Rail. So and the person I'm supporting on this, he actually told me this morning that he's an ex-pro-am sportsman. That's how he started. We're now working together in the same space.
But it moves us quite nicely on actually to your and I feel like I understand much more now your shift to Laing O'Rourke in the UK. So a contractor that was steadily developing design and engineering capabilities. And if we look back on the time at Dirac Associates and throughout your career, you've always been drawn to the edges of disciplines, working out how to manage people, different cultures, aims, perhaps languages. Is that fair? Is that
I wouldn't say the edges. I actually like the gaps.
Right. Okay.
It's because things don't fit. So actually, you're right. You're right in a way about the edges, but actually, it's then actually jumping across the gaps and finding a way that you can pull things together. And in some ways, my second job interview for, with Laing O'Rourke, I just again became intrigued because there's always a traditional kind of consultant contractor, and I think it's breaking down a lot, which is great. But for me to get invited to jump over that gap and see it from the other side of the coin it was something I just couldn't refuse, really. It was, and again, it's another example after all these versions of moving from country to country. Again, take all your consultant knowledge, split it up into ball, throw it over your shoulder, and go off and join the pirates. Not quite. I always think the poacher turned gamekeeper is a really, really good definition of contractor consultant. Apart from the fact you're never sure which way round it is.
Yes. And what was the experience like working for a contractor? Laing O'Rourke's are doing very interesting things with employing ex-consultants of very high standing, and you were one of them. But it's a fascinating place from the outside.
Yeah.
What's the reality of working there?
Well, it was interesting. Having come back to the UK only just before, Laing O'Rourke had a real buzz about it. They very much seen as the cool kids. And the work being done around off-site manufacturing, DFMA. I hadn't had a lot of dealings with them, but I was working quite closely through my involvement in BIM. I talked to them several times about the digital engineering philosophy that had been put together. And really, for the first 3 years, I was working in a group called the Engineering Excellence Group there, which was charged with developing that philosophy, helping it be deployed on projects, supporting teams with problems, working with academia, and for my slightly schizophrenic brain, that was great. It was just different things coming at you every day, but also the opportunity to. And one of the things I've written, there's been a few examples there where the side of a stockpile slipped, for instance, and normally because of legal responsibilities as a consultant, you'll be there. Slightly backing away from the problem, not wanting to expose yourself legally. It's very good to be faced by that and be, because one of our roles was to be called in and give technical support when a problem occurs. The honesty of being able to stand there and just give your best shot because it's all our problem because we're the main contractor. I found that so refreshing. And no politics at all. So for me, that was a very, very interesting. And also you just see all the other pressures. Every now and again, I see consultants talking about, we could become a tier 1 contractor. There's a lot of other stuff. There is because then that was the first 3 years working in Engineering Excellence Group. The last 3 years have mainly been actually deployed out onto projects, helping develop technical strategy, lead the digital engineering strategy and the manufacturing strategy, and try and bring all that together. So working across the consultants that are reporting in. But as part of those teams, then you suddenly find that there's a whole procurement operation that I hadn't really previously been aware of, which after Grenfell, procurement is such a hot subject. And so that's a massive issue, and it's great to be exposed to the pressures those guys are under. And then also things, the health and safety people. It's a real issue if you're a contractor. It's a day-to-day important issue that you can't really replicate in a consultant. The way that digital engineering was being talked about and being coordinated and then deployed out to the logistics for the crane. It just goes on and on and on. And the thing about the Laing O'Rourke approach is that they vertically integrated a lot of that. About 60% is the number of the hours. There tend to be companies within there, which then means driving integration and driving excellence is something that a lot of the barriers have been removed. So for me, it was a really interesting, big learning experience, stretching, great to do, really good to do. And again, the first bit was a lot of technical stuff and kind of recognizable from being a consultant. I moved more and more to being in bigger construction teams, and given as somebody who has actually designed furniture over at this end of things, I was quite a long way from home by then. But hugely valuable, and a lot of the things that I've learned there, having now gone end to end in the design to delivery process, it's really interesting trying to work out where John adds value these days, and that's quite fun at the moment.
And that's where I think we'd go next. Really, you've moved now to becoming an independent consultant. What's next for you? Where are you going? What do you intend to continue to do?
It's odd. In some ways, I deliberately took a break. I kind of realised that in 34 years, I'd only ever taken a maximum of 3 weeks off. And so, especially given the state of future holidays for 2020, the fact that Anne and I went off and spent 2 months wearing flip-flops in India, I'm very pleased we did that early on. And I talked about joining a few companies and going back into consultancy, but a bit of me is like, done it. I'm 56. I don't know when retirement happens, but like, what's John Paul? I've done all this stuff. What was it for? And it's quite interesting. I'm having Anne did a graphic design course, and in some way, small bits of graphics are quite useful. And after doodling around a lot, I'm not even sure it's a company. I've just ended up writing a little box. I've got a logo now, which is a little red box that's got civil and structural. Because if you've ever done I and T-shaped people, that's where I started. That's the stem of my T. And the way I've spread out has been around digital and integration. And it was quite funny so that's what I'm doing now. So there are several things I'm planning that are happening at the moment, which are around being proper engineering. I don't want to say that because actually, that's kind of a non-integrated way of putting it. But more traditional, more recognizable civil and structural engineering. Then there's a lot of stuff which is around this integration and digital piece, which is talking about how do you land new construction technology, which is potentially disruptive? How do you land it in a transformative way, and help some of the big companies, some of the big clients configure themselves and configure their thinking around understand, setting themselves up so they can receive the ideas that they need. And it's been great to take a bit of time to just talk around a number of people, and now there's a good network of. I don't think I'll be working directly as me for a while. I'm probably just going to be tucked in behind other people. I've got a bit of paper down here which says interesting things with interesting people.
Well, that feels like a very good place to leave it, really, and a good manifesto for everybody's career. John, thank you very much for being our first guest. It's been a fascinating conversation.
It's been a pleasure. I'm glad to be the guinea pig.
If you'd like to know more about John, then please head to his website at csdiengineering.co.uk. John is a member of the Executive Committee of the British Group of the International Association of Bridge and Structural Engineers, IABSE. IABSE is a group of designers and engineers that are passionate and inspired by the world around us. To find out more, head to our website at www.iabse.org.uk. Thank you very much for listening.